As I do every morning, I was reading the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and I read this article about one of the heirs to the Hermes fortune that was worth about $13 billion, who now claims that he's out of money because his wealth was stolen. Now, a couple of interesting things about the reading is it seems like the reason why he's potentially broke, it's unclear who owns the shares at this point, whether it's him or somebody else. And the reason that it's unclear is because, surprisingly, these shares were issued in bearer form, which who knew that part of the shares in Hermes were bearer shares worth $13 billion. That's, if you have $13 billion worth of bearer shares, if you don't know, they're not registered. It doesn't have a person's name on it. Whoever physically holds the shares is the shareholder of the company. So if you have bearer shares in Hermes like this guy did worth $13 billion, that's like having $13 billion in cash somewhere. That's just ridiculous to begin with. But the other part of this situation is...
Welcome to the Wealth Uncensored podcast, straight talk about everything that impacts your wealth. In each episode, I share what I've learned through my own experience and 2 decades of helping high net worth clients structure their affairs to minimize taxes and protect their assets for the next generation. I'll also feature special guests who are experts in their own field, sharing their knowledge and experience to help you protect what's yours. I'm your host, Jimmy Sexton. Let's dive into today's show.
that he's essentially claiming that his longtime wealth and financial advisor essentially absconded with the money. At least this is the theory put forward in the article that I read. And it got me thinking. Over the years, I've seen a few unfortunate clients get robbed by financial advisors, trustees, and people like that. But one of the things that occurred to me is every time one of these people got robbed, it was because they entrusted a single person with their wealth. It's never a good idea to entrust a single person with your wealth. Now, I'm not talking about a single company like a wealth management company or a big trustee company. I'm talking about a one-man operation where one person has control of all the wealth. If what this article says is true about the Hermes heir, that his $13 billion was stolen in the form of bearer shares by his financial advisor, then this is a huge case of somebody being robbed by a single person. I've been in this business for over 20 years, and I've not seen a lot of people get robbed. The 2 cases that I can think of, one was somebody where also they entrusted a wealth management firm of one, and the dude stole a bunch of money. The other one was, it was a licensed trust company, but it was in a small island jurisdiction. It was essentially a licensed trust company of one dude. There was one guy in charge, and the money disappeared. So my point being is, don't ever entrust your wealth to a single person, regardless of whether it's a wealth manager or a trustee. If you're going to hire a wealth manager, for example, hire a wealth management company. It has multiple employees, that has boards, that has committees, that has checks and balances, that has oversight. I have not ever seen a client get robbed, or anybody for that matter, get robbed from a wealth management company that was a legitimate wealth management company with checks and balances and oversight, probably even employs the 4 eyes principle. This way, the different employees can look over each other's shoulders and make sure there's nothing fishy going on. The same goes for trust companies. Trust companies are usually very well regulated throughout the world. You want a trust company with a robust infrastructure. You want multiple directors, you want employees, you want staff, you want procedures, checks and balances, oversight, the 4 eyes principle. You want all of this stuff because, again, in a case of a trustee that's like a big business with many employees and stuff, I've not ever seen anybody get robbed, plan or not. And this brings me to the next topic, which is structuring a private trust company for your trust or the board of your foundation. I actually did a video on this. It covers other aspects of structuring a board of a PTC or a foundation, not specifically about getting robbed. So I'm going to cover that in this video. To the other video about structuring the board of a PTC or a family foundation, I'll post the link in the description. But in this case, a lot of times I've seen people set up a PTC or a foundation, and they just want to appoint one dude to the board. You run the same risk. You put one person in charge of your wealth, there's a good chance they're going to abscond with it. So it's really important that when you structure the board to a PTC or a foundation, that you have more than one person on it. Preferably, you want at least 3 people on it. Because one of the problems is, if you have 2 people, what happens in the case of an equality of votes? You have a stalemate. Nothing happens. And for that reason, most PTC or foundation governing documents say that in the case of an equality of votes, if there's an equal amount of directors or managers or counselors, that the chairman of the meeting gets a second cast and vote. The problem is, then you put too much power on that one person. Essentially, that one person then controls the board, because if the other dude doesn't agree, then, he's just going to exercise his casting vote. So if you have at least 3 or an odd number of directors, counselors, depending on the jurisdiction, they're called different things. If you have at least 3 people on the board, then you don't have this equality of votes problem or one guy having a cast and vote issue. But when you structure the board, you don't want a single person in charge because it could abscond with your wealth. You don't want 2 people in charge because of the equality of votes problem. You want at least 3 people on the board or some other odd number. And you also want to make sure that you employ the 4 eyes principle. You want to make sure that any action that's being taken or any agreement that's being signed or transaction entered into always requires the signature of at least 2 of the directors, counselors, managers, whatever you want to call them. It varies jurisdiction by jurisdiction. But the point being, don't entrust your wealth to one person. When you structure the board of your PTC or your foundation, make sure there's multiple people on there. Make sure that there's procedures for how decisions are met. Make sure the 4 eyes principle is employed. And you may want to even have, it varies jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but you may even want to have a trust protector or a foundation protector or guardian who has oversight over the board, whose consent is required for certain types of transactions. So let's say, for example, one of the ones that I typically put in trusts and foundations is that any distribution requires the consent of the protector or the guardian. Or, for example, moving the foundation or trust to another jurisdiction or amending it or whatever requires the consent of the protector or the guardian. This is really important. You can even put in there that any type of financial transaction with a value over a certain amount of money requires the consent of the protector or the guardian. So if you have a combination of a board of 3 people or some greater odd number, the 4 eyes principle is mandated, and then you have protector or guardian consent required for certain types of actions, that's going to give you much more security over your wealth. You worked hard to get it, or you inherited it, you want to keep it. And I understand that it's more work. This is a lot of times the opposition that people have to putting a board like that in place and those types of procedures is that what's administratively burdensome. You need more resolutions, you need the protector or guardian consent, people might be traveling or whatever. Yeah, it's true. It is more administratively burdensome. And you would be much more nimble with just one person in charge, but it's just not worth the risk. Don't do it. Don't put one person in charge. It happens if one person is in charge with no oversight. There's certainly a greater chance of your wealth being absconded with than if it's overseen by a board of 3 people with guardian or protector consent required for certain types of transactions. It's your wealth. It's worth the extra administrative burden, and it takes a little bit more time to execute transactions and make decisions, but it's well worth it to secure your wealth. So this is why my advice is, don't entrust your wealth to one dude. He might run off with it, and then you're going to be poor. He's going to be living it up, until he goes to jail. But anyway, that's my advice. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode.
Thank you for joining me on Wealth Uncensored, where we help you minimize taxes and protect your wealth for the next generation. If you like our show, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. And if you have any questions or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at info@esquiregroup.com. And don't forget to visit Esquire Group's website for more information on how we can help you secure your wealth. I'll be dropping knowledge again next week. Don't forget to join us.